Hi, I'm George Pearson, and in this Photoshop Elements versus Photoshop CC video, we'll be looking at some of the similarities and differences between the two programs. Now, if you enjoy this video, make sure that you click the like button and also subscribe to my channel. If you want to learn more about Photoshop or Photoshop Elements, take a look at my complete training, which you'll find on Amazon, and the link for that is in the description. Okay, let's get to it. Let's see how these two programs compare. Here's Photoshop Elements versus Photoshop CC back in the background here. Now, there are a lot of differences and also a lot of similarities. Obviously, we have similar menus across the top, similar toolbars here on the left-hand side. Most of the tools are very similar as well. If you've learned how to edit in Photoshop Elements, you'll have no problem at all switching over to Photoshop. They're really very similar. If you have learned in Photoshop, you will most likely find Photoshop Elements a bit limiting. The main thing you can think of here is that Elements is the consumer level program and Photoshop in the background there is the professional level program. If you're working professionally, I'd recommend that you use Photoshop and not Elements. Although there are reasons to use Elements even if you are a professional. I personally use it all the time. So it's a very good program. It's one of my favorites. Actually, I really love Photoshop Elements, but most of my professional work is done in Adobe Photoshop. Okay, let's take a look at Photoshop and see what are some of the differences from Elements. Let's just put that right there and we'll switch over. There we go. Okay, as I said, there's really just a lot more inside of Adobe Photoshop. It's a much more advanced program, a lot more to it. Just as a few examples, there are a few more tools over here on the left hand side in the tool panel, including right down here we have the pen tool, which allows you to draw and work with vector graphics, and the select and direct select tool here for working with paths, vector graphic paths. You can't do that in Elements, so you have the ability to work with paths. Along with the paths, of course, over here there is a paths panel. When you've made a path, you can work with the panel over here. Right to the left here, the paths, we have channels. You can work in separate channels inside of Photoshop, but not in Photoshop Elements. So it has the ability to work in channels. Right now this image is in RGB, and this shows one of the other main differences here. And that is that Photoshop Elements right here always works in RGB mode. If we go up here to Image and come down to Mode, you'll see we have RGB. We can go lower than this, Index, which is your GIF images and your PNG 8, Grayscale and Bitmap, but that's as far up as it goes. We're working in 8 bits per channel. That's your only option right there, 8 bits per channel. Let's go back over to Photoshop, and we take a look at Mode over here, which is in the top up here. There's RGB. Everything in here is basically the same. There's also a duotone mode, not a big deal. But beyond RGB, you can also work in CMYK, lab color, and multi-channel. Now, the most important one here for professionals is the CMYK color. This is your color separation mode. So if you are working for a professionally printed output, you're designing magazines, things like that are going to be printed on a 4-color printing press, you have to be working in CMYK color mode. So you can't do that over in Elements, but you can do it here in the full version of Adobe Photoshop. So you have this additional mode, very important, and this is one of the main reasons right here why, if you're working professionally, you probably want to be working here in Adobe Photoshop. Notice also down below we have 8 bits per channel, or 16, or 32. So there are more channels available in here if you have to use those. Most people never really bother with this stuff. It's not that important. Even most professional work is still in 8 bits per channel, but you do have that option to go higher if you need to. So those are some big differences right there. It's just a more advanced program. Let's look at the menus up here. There's a few more additional things. One of the great menus here is the Type menu. Again, if you're working professionally and you're doing magazine layouts, articles, anything that involves a lot of text and printing, then having the Type menu, this direct access to type, is very useful. So again, something which is far more important if you're working professionally, if you're doing a lot of work with typography. And you can do things like kerning your spacing between your letters, do that kind of fun stuff here, which you can't do over in Adobe Photoshop Elements. So very useful ability in here. There are a few more filters in here. Vanishing point filter is kind of fun. There are a few things like that. There's a Camera Raw filter right in here. You can open your images up in Camera Raw over inside of Elements and do a lot of Camera Raw stuff in that. Is a great tool. This is a more advanced version of the same thing. There's also a 3D section. You actually can work with actual 3D shapes and work in an actual 3D environment and change your cameras, change your lighting, and light 3D objects and apply textures onto those objects, things that you can't even dream of over in Photoshop Elements. So there is this 3D. Something else down below here, I'll just bring this up, it's the timeline. This is an area that allows you to work with animation and video. You actually can do some video editing here inside of Photoshop. It's not great, but you can do a lot there. It is quite a bit of capability here if you're creative with it. Personally, I prefer a regular video editing program to what's involved here in Photoshop, but sometimes there are tools in here that you don't have in a video editing program because we have all the great image editing tools, 3D tools, things like that. So you can do some fancy stuff in here which you may not be able to do over in a regular video editing program. And that's what that is used for. So it has this timeline or video editing ability. Let's just take a fast look here at the window menu, and you can get an idea of how much is available here inside of Adobe Photoshop. Just loads of stuff. Let's switch back over to Elements for a minute. Here we are, here's Elements, and let's take a look at that window menu. There you go. You see how much shorter this is. The Photoshop menu went clear to the bottom of the page. The Elements menu is just this long, so there's nowhere near as much stuff available. Now, if you've been following me on YouTube, you can see how much you actually can do inside of Elements. It's a phenomenally powerful program. And if you know what you're doing and you practice with it a little bit, it's a very great tool. If you don't have to be working for a CMYK output, if you're doing things for your own use or small business use, or if you're working for the internet, for the web use, Photoshop Elements is a great program and may do everything that you need. And the cost, of course, is lower, and also the simplicity is much greater, making it very, very easy to use. Let's go back to Photoshop again just for a minute here. So, lots of additional tools in here. We have the additional menus, pen tools. We have our image modes up here, which are more advanced. But if you look around, you see there are some things missing in here as well. There are some things that are common inside of Elements which you don't have over here in Photoshop. So my personal recommendation really is to have both programs and then use the best parts of both programs. Let's now switch back over to Elements and take a look at some of the things over there which Elements has and Photoshop doesn't. Just switch over. Here we go. Now, some of the things in here, we have different editing modes up here. We have the eLive, which is a link to online content from Adobe. There's lots of additional content in here, lots of little sections for additional training. Some additional videos are in here, some how-to tutorials, some ideas are in here. It's an interesting place to kind of look through to get inspiration. And we don't have eLive over there in Photoshop CC. We have the quick mode in here, the quick editing mode, and this allows you to very quickly do some fast changes. We have all of our adjustments here: Smart Fix, exposure, lighting, color, balance, sharpen. A lot of quick things that you can do onto an image in here and using some real basic tools. So it's a real quick way to do some fast stuff without having to spend a lot of time playing around with settings. It's real nice if you're in a hurry. We don't have any quick mode over in Photoshop CC. There's the guided mode, which has all kinds of neat little helps that will walk you through step-by-step different processes, how to adjust your brightness, contrast, correct skin tone. There's color guided modes, black and white, fun edits, like the out of bounds trick over here. kind of effects collage thing, photo text, text inside of photos and photos out of text, picture stacks. Now I've already done demonstrations on how to do this kind of stuff, manually, and you can do this of course in Photoshop, but this are little walkthroughs which will help you with the whole process and saves you a lot of time. So it's, again, real interesting special effects stuff in your special edits. Now here is one, the frame creator, which allows you to create custom frames, and this leads us back to the expert mode over here. Something else which you don't have in Photoshop CC is the graphics section over here. You don't have any of these backgrounds, this whole background set right there. You can automatically add backgrounds to an image. You don't have these frames. That's what that custom frame thing was about over there on the guided edits. You don't have all these frames to use. You don't have any of these graphics in here. You have some shapes, and I'll show you where those are in just a second. You do have shapes, but they're a little bit different way of approaching these and working with these. So these you kind of have in both programs. And there's all these text effects. You don't have any of these over in Adobe Photoshop CC. We also have this effects section in here. Faded photos, glowing effects, monotone color effects, painting, panels, seasons, textures, vintage. You don't have any of this over in Adobe Photoshop CC. We have all these filters in here. Now these are filters that are working with, taken from the filter menu up here. You have the filters in both programs. You actually have more filters added over into the Photoshop CC list, but all the basic filters are available in both, but you don't have this easy access panel over here for using this. So it's a bit easier to work with. There's more help, more guidance here inside of Photoshop Elements, which can make it much faster to do work. Also on our styles over here, we have all these fancy built-in styles, bevels, complex styles in here, drop shadows, glass buttons, image effects, glows, photo effects, strokes, the wow chrome, the wow neon. You've actually seen me use a lot of these over in my Photoshop Elements video projects on YouTube. So they're real powerful tools in here, and again, helps that can help you go through. Now I can recreate a lot of this look if I wanted to take the time over in Adobe Photoshop CC, but why bother when you have all that built in here? Just real fast click and add an effect. So it's a real great time saver as well. And again, one of the reasons why I personally use both programs, and I'll use the parts of each program that it's best at. I'll probably finish things up over in Photoshop, but I'll do a lot of work over here as well because of all of these additional options in here, the graphics in particular. Let's go back and just take a look at something else on this. Let's go back to our layers right now. I'll click on the background image layer in here, and let's bring up our layer style. Here we go. Here's our style settings. You can see here with the layer styles, we have quite a few things. We have drop shadows, size, distance, and opacity, glows, inner, outer glows, have bevels. Now it's a soft bevel. You can do a hard bevel by starting off with one of your styles and then bringing this in and adjusting the size there. And stroke with inside, outside, not a whole lot options in here. Inside, outside are centered. So we do have some of these real basic options. You can do a lot with these styles. Let's take a look back over at Photoshop again. Let me bring up that same menu in here. Bring up our layer styles. Here's our layer. There's our layer styles. And let's bring up blending options in here, and we'll take a look at bevel and emboss. There we go. Here's the layer style. This bevel and emboss has a lot of stuff available in here. We have our style, inner, outer. We have our technique. You can adjust depth, size, and soften. This part here is pretty much the same as you have over there in Elements. But then there's all this shading stuff down below here, which you can add a lot to the effect they're going for. So we have our bevel in here. Stroke, we have that as well. Again, more options in here than we had over there. We have blending mode options, for instance. There's an inner shadow. Again, more options here. We can adjust the contour or the shape of the shadow. Same thing with our outer glow. We have a satin effect down here, color overlay, gradient overlay, pattern overlay. I tend to use these a lot when I'm working in Photoshop. And of course the drop shadow down below. Even with the drop shadow in here, we can adjust the contour of the drop shadow, actually change the shape of the drop shadow. Now a lot of this kind of stuff here, this and over up on the bevels in here, a lot of the shape changes. This is the kind of stuff that you see back over in Elements if you are going to Styles in here and you're looking at your bevels. These different kind of bevels in here, these are things that are you can build easily over there in Photoshop CC, but here you have to use these small selections. So again, not as much power or control. So there's kind of just a brief overview, a brief look at the two different programs and the differences between them. And here's my recommendations. If you are working just for internet use, then you probably only need to have Photoshop Elements. If you need a lot of real fancy effects, a lot of real creative control, then you're going to want to have the Photoshop CC because it gives you all those additional tools. If you are working with text a lot, then you really want to be using Photoshop because of the type menu up here and its much more advanced ability to work with text and type. So you want to have Photoshop for that. If you are working for a professional printing output, printing for magazines, anything that is going to be using a 4-color printing press, professional 4-color printing press, then you're going to want to have or work with Adobe Photoshop CC because it has that CMYK color mode right there. So again, if you're working professionally, you really want to be using Photoshop CC. But even then, as I have said, I like both programs and I use both programs all the time, and I use them for their strengths. And you can easily do that. One thing I hadn't mentioned here, but they both work with the same file format. I actually have the same file open here in both programs. So they work with the same file format, they kind of share the format, so you can easily do some of your work in one program, close it down, open it up in the other program, and do more of your work over there in the other program. So you can work with both programs even on the same project. They're really not that expensive anyway. I think the Photoshop Elements right now is running about $120 or so if you get the Elements and the Premiere Elements video editing program, which is a great editor for video as well. The combined is about $120, $130, somewhere in there. It's not that expensive, but you pay it once and then use it as long as you want to have that program, 2, 3, 4 years. When you want to upgrade, you then pay again for the upgrade. The difference with Photoshop CC is that this is on a subscription basis and you pay on a monthly or yearly basis. The least expensive way I know of getting Photoshop CC on the subscription is to get their combined photography set or photography program, which includes Photoshop CC and Photoshop Lightroom. Right now it's version 6. It's been version 6 for a few years now. But it's those two, and it's about $10 a month on the subscription. That's really not bad. It's comparable to the cost of getting Photoshop Elements if you paid for it every single year. If you upgrade it every single year, you might as well just go for Photoshop CC with that subscription. It's basically the same cost. But there you go. That's a look at the two different programs and at some of the benefits of each of the different programs, why you want to use one or the other. Now again, my personal preference, I like them both for different reasons and I use them both continually. Some parts I prefer over in Elements, some parts I prefer over in Photoshop CC. So there you go. That's a look at Photoshop Elements versus Photoshop CC. And finally, a good way to get a good feeling for how these two programs are similar and different is just to watch the videos on my YouTube channel. I have quite a few videos actually where I do the same project in the two different programs. I'll usually separate those by a month or so I'm not doing back-to-back projects exactly the same, just so that things aren't getting boring in there. But you can find a lot of different training tutorials that I've done over there where I do the same project in the two different programs, and you can see the pluses and minuses between those different programs there. So there you go. Again, that's a look at Photoshop Elements versus Photoshop CC. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you found it useful. If you like this video, click on the like button below to let others know. You can click the subscribe button so you don't miss any of my videos in the future. I'm frequently uploading new training videos. Don't forget to check out my website at howtogurus.com.